thank you all for coming. It's such a pleasure. This is my first visit here. I'm having a wonderful time here at Powerhouse. I wanted to say I am so honored to be doing this with you, Modupe. And yeah, this is a pleasure.
I'm excited as well. I'm honored. So yeah, where do we begin?
No, this is a random intro, but we almost matched.
Almost, yeah.
Not exactly the same, but I have an outfit from the same designer, and
Yes.
I was this close to bringing it with me.
Yeah.
Should have. Someone will have to do this again.
We'll have to do it again. Yeah. I mean, we just spoke a few hours ago, and I was like, what's the plan? And so I was like, it's just as well that we've done this quite impromptu, because left to me, we'd be wearing the same thing. We would have intro music, dancing down the aisles. And so I'm happy to not have to put you through that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was thinking the first thing we could talk about is how we met.
Okay.
I was trying to recall, I don't remember the year. 2017
It was
would
2017,
be my guess. Okay.
November.
But I was in Nigeria, in Lagos for ArtX, and was there a talk?
There was a talk. There was a talk. You were the headliner. She was the headliner.
No, but I don't think it was I don't think it was at my talk, though.
No, that's right.
Somebody talked about your work.
Okay. So I remember it perfectly because I might have journaled about it the next day extensively. But she was the headliner, and she gave a talk first, right? And then afterwards, there were two other Nigerian artists who gave a talk. It was a panel discussion. I was not supposed to be on that panel discussion. And in the middle, halfway through, the moderator says, hey, there's an artist in here that should be on this panel, which is very awkward for me. But they pulled up a seat, and then I was asked to give a spiel about my work, and I did. Delivered something in 2 minutes, and then you came up to me afterwards, and you were like, oh my gosh, this is like really incredible work. What residencies are you doing? Where have you shown? And then you were like, take my email address. I want to recommend you for something. And she did recommend me for the ISCP Fellowship, which I then completed in 2018, which led to so much for me. We can talk about it later. But yeah, that is Njideka for you.
Oh, thanks. So when I met Modupe, and that's ringing a bell, because I remember it was something that wasn't about you, but you ended up talking about your work, but it made such an impression on me. It's like, every once in a while, you come across artists who are so thoughtful in what they do. It just pierces everything and stays with you. And it was this work, and I'll give you a chance to talk about it, but it just felt relevant. It was heavy, the things you were discussing, thinking of unemployment in Nigeria, the education system. It felt interactive. It didn't feel preachy, but it was still teaching people about life, how things work out, how so much of it is luck. It had funny elements too. Like I was looking at a video of it a while back, and there's this part where you're like, oh, congratulations for being an exceptional teacher. You get rewarded by teaching 2 extra classes at no cost, at like no extra pay. So it was like this very interactive, it's like when you think of, I think a lot of my work is about Nigeria and how complex it is and beautiful, but there's also a lot of like heavy stuff in it. Unemployment is incredibly high. Corruption is just through the roof. So you're dealing, and the education system is just unraveling in our lifetime. And it was really remarkable to see you tackle really heavy things in an effective way. It was accessible. It did not feel like lecturing. People were engaged. Yeah, it's just one of those things that stayed with me. So it's like I remember coming up to you like, who is she? I want to be her friend. And we've kept in touch since. I'll give you a chance to talk about this.
I think you summarized it quite well. And the example you gave, it's a game installation that you walk inside. It's obviously a Rubik's Cube on the outside, but you walk in and it describes the many challenges of the Nigerian education system. You did such a great job. I was shaking a little bit, like, how does she know all of these examples? Because there are many examples, and the one that I typically cite is one where you, as a student, she gave one as an example as a teacher. As a student, you might roll the dice in the game, and you have been fortunate enough to get into a university. Those odds are quite low to begin with, but you get into one. And because your university has gone on so many strikes, your 4-year program becomes a 7-year program. So you're asked to kindly take 3 steps backwards. And the policymakers have their own challenges. The teachers have their own issues as well. And yeah, it's a game that looks like child's play, but the consequences are life-altering in many instances, and the odds aren't stacked up for you to actually win. Yeah.
So I was thinking that's how we met, and since then, your work has changed a lot. And I think the really exciting thing about it is just, for me, it just drives home the fact that, you know, being a good artist is about almost like your ability to think. Sorry, I'm going to get to the point I'm trying to make. But I feel like even though your work has changed from when I first met you and what you were doing then, it's still like the things I liked about this are still in your current work. It's
Sure.
this taking your very vast life experience and figuring out a way to direct it at the things you're interested in with art. And I actually have a question about that, which is that you've had a very, not unusual, but you've had like an interesting academic journey. So you did your bachelor's was in engineering?
Chemical.
And then you have a master's in
One in economics. And one in
then
education.
You did one in, it's like in technology in education. So I'm just curious, how did that journey, how did you end up at art? And I wanted to say that's actually something very interesting I've noticed with Nigerian creatives, like a number of us who are artists, writers, sometimes musicians, fashion designers, always end up coming to the creative field from different ways. But you know, like Jewel by Lisa, I think studied law.
Oh, really? Yeah, everyone has
Everybody
a little backup degree somewhere.
The acceptable thing our parents wanted us to do.
Yeah. So actually, where my parents are concerned, and I always give them, some credit for this. I was really quite good at both the arts and the sciences, but I think as a 17-year-old, I was like, I think I want to study something like chemical engineering. Even though my parents were like, you can do whatever you want as long as you do it really well and make sure you have a retirement plan. But actually, I don't think you know this, Njideka, but I grew up everywhere else except for Nigeria. Togo, Rwanda, England. Yeah, so I had very little.
I was trying to find out where you went to secondary school and I couldn't.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. So I
was like, did she go to QC? I would have known her.
No,
which is Queen's College.
No. There are no records. I was I was in England for middle school and secondary school. And then I'd finished my GCSEs, which is like the equivalent is 11th grade here. And I was ready to go to college, but my parents were like, you're 16, you're too young, why don't you come to Nigeria and live there? For the first time in my life, actually, I moved to Nigeria as a 16-year-old and was exposed to learning about Nigeria for the first time, which was so interesting. I mean, it really was a crash course for me. None of my siblings live in Nigeria. I think that was a turning point for me to actually be like, this is home for me, even though it wasn't a default home for me. And in my time in school in Nigeria for the first time, I was learning so much about the culture, the people for the first time. I mean, we talked about like corruption, and it was a bit discouraging, right? Because I think when you come back, you're looking for really positive role models or people or things to anchor onto. And I remember, and this influenced my decision to actually study chemical engineering, reading about your mother, who was the head of NAFDAC. I think the equivalent is the FDA here, so the Food and Drug Administration, and helped stop the importation of fake drugs into Nigeria. And I just remember thinking like there are people like this, like was known for so much like honesty and like moral standing. Sorry, didn't expect that. But It actually influenced. So I said to myself, like, I'm gonna go to America. I'm gonna study chemical engineering, and I'm gonna make my own drugs. So I have my own pharmacy, and I can be on this path as well of like, making sure we don't have fake drugs in the country. So that was my naive 16-year-old thinking, and what led me to chemical engineering. So it just this full circle is too full, and. After that, economics, you just, I don't know. I was just thinking about how the world works, why some countries win and others don't. Having lived in England, I have a perfect knowledge, of British history, Battle of Hastings, all of those things. American history, I have almost nothing of Nigeria. So I just started asking myself, why do nations turn out one way versus another way? And that led me to study economics. And then, my answer to that was education, I think, which led me to, naturally get a master's in education, as one does. And then, like 12 years ago, I was working in the education sector and experienced quite a few things, many of which ends up in this game that we described earlier. And I just thought that if people could see things differently, maybe we could do things differently. And I was like, I think I should be an artist. And I left my job quite promptly. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have savings, but I did it, and I entered into the national art competition. That was the first thing I did. Luckily, I won. And I've been doing it ever since. It's been 12 years. Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for that, and thanks so much for the lovely things you said about my mom. Yeah, it always feels really odd to be, not odd, but it's like I'm anonymous in America in a very interesting way.
No, you're not.
But okay. But I mean, the story I often tell is whenever I come back to Nigeria and I hand over my passport, it's almost like I can almost predict it. So they take it, they open it, they look at it, they look at me, they look at it, and they go, "Are you related to?" I was like, "Yes, she's my mother." And then they're like, "Are you going to be as amazing as she is?" I'm like, "I'm trying."
Yes, of course.
So it's funny because when things happen in my career, like in Nigerian news, is always like, Dora Akunyili's daughter. So even till now, I'm still not my own person in Nigeria. I'm known through my mom. That's how like popular and beloved she was. But in telling your story of your parents wanting you to come back to Nigeria, where were you for that 1 year?
Ibadan.
I have questions about your connection to Ibadan. But that actually reminded me of something similar my parents did, which is we all went to primary school and secondary school in Nigeria, and not the rule, but the thing we did in our family was after you finished secondary school, you left Nigeria and came to the United States, and you took 1 year off before going to college. Oh, nice. So I mean, we didn't know it was called a gap year. It was something my parents thought of. And it was a year for you to, because they just understood that the move was overwhelming. So it was a year for you to settle into a new country. But there are like so many little things you don't understand about how things work in a place, the things you take for granted, that happens multiple times every day. Anybody who grew up in another country knows what I'm talking about. So it was a year for us to just get used to a new country, and in that 1 year, we were living in Philadelphia because my oldest sister was at Penn. I know we have a Penn connection. And so you have an apartment near her so she can take care of you, and you take classes at the Community College of Philadelphia. And it was also a chance to take things that we did not study in Nigeria. So because like Nigerian literature will be different from the literature that you'll study here. So like when I came, I didn't know the classics because we had our own classics, which was what I knew. It's like, and that's why I don't like it when people say like, "Oh, you don't know this?" It's like, no. Do you know this person? Like, you don't know my classics either. So it was like time for us to catch up on that. So as you're talking about that, I found myself having this moment of, that's so interesting that even though the advice was different, our parents had this kind of like need for us to experience like a broader world than we knew. And I think that was something that was very important to a lot of that generation. And every once in a while, I find myself thinking, like, what was it about their life and their childhood that made them appreciate the complexity of the world and understand that it was important for their children to understand that. Because I grew up in a very small, homogeneous town, and thinking back on my life, my mom had always pushed for us to step out of this box of homogeneity. So for instance, we all went to boarding school in Lagos. And I went to boarding school I think I was 11 years old.
Me too.
We go to boarding school really young in Nigeria. And I mean, you leave home and go live in your secondary school for 6 years. And lots of times you're near your family, but I wasn't even near my family because Enugu to Lagos was a 9-hour drive. This was before we could afford flying, so we had to drive. So we left at the beginning of this term, and we did not go home for midterms. We stayed on campus with like 9 other people who had nowhere to go. For like day breaks, I can't remember what it was called, exeat, where you had to go home. We stayed there. So we didn't see our parents till the end of the term. But my parents, especially my mother, pushed for that because she understood that life was more than the little town we were growing up in. It was a very homogeneous town, and she wanted us to experience the complexity of the world. And I feel like, that's still what was still undergirding my work, my practice. I mean, this might be a good time to click, is just thinking of how rich and complex the world is in all its different forms because I have moved through all these different spaces.
Excellent. Well, now that I've clicked here, would you like to say something about this work, this beautiful work?
Oh, thank you. This is called Blending Standouts. It's a piece I finished in, I think, 2020, but it's based off of me and my husband. Oh, the one that's facing front. It's based off of me and my partner is the person sitting on the chair. So in my work, I have small transferred photographs, and they're usually pictures from Nigeria, historical pictures I take when I go home, pictures from magazines. So really thinking of all the experiences I had growing up and how when you move, you carry your home and your experiences and your memories with you. So that's one aspect of it.
It's such a beautiful. Has everyone seen these works, like in person? Yeah, no, they are just mesmerizing, captivating. And I think what I love most about it, maybe not particularly this one, but I made some of the older ones. It feels like you painted it for us. There's like so many inside references, what people are wearing, the lanterns, like, there's like a dining table with Milo and the little cube sugars, and it's like, it's best inside joke, but then everyone else also understands the beauty and the power, and so it's transcendent in that way.
If you click to the yellow one, that might have some aspects of it, then we can always click back. This one. No, back. Back? No, the one with hanging dress. This one, yeah. So this one was finished in, sorry, my sense of dates, I shouldn't bother trying to say the date. Sometimes I'm like, what year are we in? It was finished in 2023. It's called Ejunanaga Okpulun Kolikoya. And it's actually after something my dad wrote to Justin. Because Justin and my dad will email back and forth. So it was after I got into Yale.
Justin is your husband?
Yes.
Okay.
I got into Yale. I was moving to New Haven. I think we just got married that summer. And so Justin wrote an email to my dad, just like updating him about my life. I'm a very, it's hard to tell from people don't believe it based on my work, but I'm a very private person. Like, I do not post anywhere. I do not share about my life. But Justin will always share all this stuff about our life. So he was the person who informed the family about what I was doing. So he wrote an email to my dad and told my dad, oh, we're moving to New Haven and blah, 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 and this is our apartment. And my dad had a really lovely reply. And I don't think it's an Igbo thing, but in Igbo we call it ilu, which is proverbs. But you know how elders always share wisdom with... Well. Yeah, it's when they say, when the turtle bites the snake. It's that kind of stuff. If you're I'm trying to make a decision about my life. What should I do? And they'll be when the bird flaps its wing twice. And you're just oh, my God, just answer me. But I mean, my dad was a repository of those. It's one of those things... at his funeral, that was something people talked about. They did not know anybody who knew as many Ilus as he did. So he replied to Justin, and at the end, he wrote, Ejunana aga opulung kolikoya, which means it's hard to translate. So I actually didn't translate it in the title because it's very visual. So it's when the snail moves, it kind of drags all its... Sorry for the language, shit. You just take all your stuff, your house, your unkoliko, it's all your stuff with you. And so I was thinking of that with this and all the things I've carried with me over the years, the things I've carried across the oceans. Every time I go back to Nigeria, I try to go to the market. Last time I went back home, I got the jerry can. So every time I go back home, I'm always trying to buy things that make me feel connected to home. And I grew up in a little town called Enugu, but within Enugu, I actually grew up in a little section called New Haven. And then I went to grad school at Yale in New Haven. I mean, spelled the same, we just pronounced it New Haven, Enugu. So it's this place where my two New Havens collide. So it's called New Haven in New Haven. So it has a print from, you wouldn't have used it. It's the primary school, Macmillan Primary School book. Then it has the jerry cans that I got from Nigeria. And then every time I go back home, I try to buy clothes. So it has all my Nigerian clothes that I've collected over the years in the closet and also hanging. But it's if you share some of the experiences I have growing up in Nigeria in the 80s and 90s, there are lots of things in the pictures that will be very familiar to you. Bassi and Company, Ken Saro-Wiwa, various dictators over the years living in bondage. But when I'm picking images, some of them are my family images, but I'm also thinking of, and that actually ties to swimming. I know, right? It kind of does. But I'm thinking of images that are weighted. But some things carry so much cultural, historical, different significance with them. Sorry, sometimes you don't... No, there's something I want to talk about, but when you're just I don't know if this is a story I can tell. Okay, I'll do it.
Okay.
No, but for instance, Ken Saro-Wiwa's picture is in it. And Ken Saro, so it's one of those pictures that if you see it and you don't know who it is, it's just a picture of a man. But if you know who he is, he was someone that was, it was a name that was a very big part of my childhood. You heard a lot growing up. He was someone that was fighting Shell and some other oil companies because of the pollution they were doing in the Niger Delta. And just the small industries, their fisheries and things, they couldn't survive because the water was getting very polluted. People were not getting sick. It just wasn't good for the environment. And this was during the times of the dictators. I grew up all the time I grew up in Nigeria, we had dictators. The first elected president was in Obasanjo in 99, right before I left. And so Ken Saro-Wiwa was arrested and executed. So that's like, it's like a story that really stays with Nigerians. No, you made me emotional.
I did, sorry, I made you do it. Sorry.
Yeah, so it's stuff like that, where it's just a picture for a lot of people, but for the people who know the story, it's a very weighted stuff. And I was thinking like swimming, which we can go to one of your images, really sits in that space. Like this space of like, it's just an activity, but it's also something that you can use to look at the racial history of the United States, gentrification, and all these other things. So if you want to talk about this is a great segue into this project.
Okay, so I have these two images up. I think, Eric, you chose these images, no? Okay. They're great images. From 2018, after accepting the residency that Njideka so graciously recommended me for at ISCP, I traveled to Brooklyn for 4 months to undertake my residency, and I had a very clear proposal. I was to have an exhibition after those 4 months in Ghana, and I knew I wanted to look at synchronized swimmers. I had been painting synchronized swimmers in Ibadan, a young group of teenage girls that were doing synchronized swimming, which is pretty like radical. I painted them, and it ended up being on the cover of Harper's Bazaar, which was fun because it was the first time they would have an African artist feature on the cover. And so I was looking at other Black synchronized swimmers and came across the Harlem Honeys and Bears, which is, you guys ready? It's an all-Black co-ed synchronized swimming team for senior citizens in Harlem, and they are as adorable as they sound. The youngest member, there were 35 of them at the time. The youngest member was 65, the oldest member was 96. The oldest member is still alive today at 103. She turned 103 in February. And so I got to shadow them. They would practice Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at the Hansborough Recreation Center in Harlem. And I would go and sit with them and explain to them who I was. I'm from Nigeria. Like, what? What's your name? Modupe? And, and we all became friends. The idea was, and I love just hearing about this work. I mean, I think when I first came across your work, I was like, there's so many layers. Like, how do you think about incorporating so many stories and images? Because we see all of those things, especially if you have any connection to Nigeria. You can pick out someone's image. You can pick out the fact that she's used a jerry can. There are layers upon layers. It feels like time travel. It feels like travel through space and time. And so, I mean, also just being so inspired by the ethos of your work, or maybe the way that you think, I was like, how do I create a new set of paintings of these older swimmers in Harlem, but give context to the fact that they are from Harlem and not from Nigeria, for example. And so I had 4 months to create the paintings, 2 of which you see here. Well, I'll talk about the paintings, and then I'll talk about what I did to create the layers, maybe. And so these are members of the team. The honeys are called the women are called the honeys, the men are called the bears. And so I've called this one on the left, Pink Honey. And it's funny because I said there are 35 members in the team. I ended up only painting 5 or 6 members. And, there was always the question, how did you decide who you were going to paint? And it was, I had to just kind of trust my instincts. It turns out this woman is not even like the active member on the team. She is the one that literally sits on the side and looks cute, And so when I did the big reveal, everyone was like, well, why'd you pick Miss Joyce? Anyway, I learned so much from this project, even in terms of like who's the face of a thing, right? The face of a movement. It's not necessarily the people doing the movement. No shade, Miss Joyce. And then the other 2 on the right, I've called it Gossip Girls, sort of referencing the, anyone with Gossip Girls? No? Okay, good, yeah, New York. Gossip Girls, because where 2 or 3 are gathered, there's going to be gossip, right? And so within the team dynamics, just thinking about winning. I went to competitions with them, the Senior Olympic Games. I mean, I really got involved in their lives, and so I was trying to capture little still moments of like, only God knows who they're talking about, right? But Gossip Girls in my monochromatic gold palette, which I've been using for the last almost 12 years as well, which is an interesting way of forcing myself to see range within like a really limited scope. The red caps, which are part of their uniforms, and they wear red lipstick, paint their nails red as well, helps to pop everything. But the monochromatic color palette is there. And so to give this work more sort of layering, right, because that could be my grandmother, these could be my aunties from Nigeria, I decided to do a short film on my journey with the Harlem Honeys and Bears. The curator of the show actually is right here, Catherine Finnerty, who's from New York but lives in London. And so we worked on that project together. I did this film. Gallery 1957 were gracious to support me in getting a film crew. And I just had like a list of all the things I wanted to see and talk about. And I ended up incorporating a really important text called Contested Waters by a social historian named Jeff Wiltz, and it looks at the last 100 years of United States swimming history. And it is the history of America as well, at the swimming pool. And so the different movements, the Great Depression, when Robert Moses built all these swimming pools to effectively have people like cool off and not think about depression. And what those swimming pools were like at that time and how they were segregated by gender, by class, and then eventually, actually, the last frontier was race, or at least to be documented was race. And just how even the privatization of public swimming pools led to swimming pool culture being such a thing in the US, right? So when you fly into any place in the US and you go through a suburb, it's like circle, 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 squiggle, squiggle, pool, pool, pool. Everyone has a pool. It's a very American thing. But it also just talks about how people extracted themselves from what was otherwise community life and retreated to, do their own thing, and, seems to keep happening. But it was a really good educational piece for me to even understand America better through the lens of the swimming pool. And it also makes their journeys just even more significant, right? The journeys of many of these swimmers who didn't learn to swim until they were in their 60s or 70s because they didn't have access to swimming pools in the United States. And so, I have so much deep respect for them. They were so open to me, so generous with their stories. And I guess I should mention, I created it in 2018. It ended up being nominated for a New York Emmy Award in 2022, and then later won the award. So yeah, there's an Emmy Award for this, which is kind of crazy. Yeah, thank you guys. I was very shocked. I went with my hair. I didn't look like this. I'll tell you that. I wasn't prepared because I didn't expect to win. But it's almost a no-brainer when you think about it because they are just so adorable. Their stories are so deep, so vast, so wide, and it was an honor for me to carry the stories. And we got to bring it back. We screened it first at the Brooklyn Museum in 2019, and then this work was acquired by the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and then another work was in the Schomburg Center, so we brought the work back to Harlem. So it was nice to also just keep having them in the dialogue and having them now in these other public spaces where maybe there isn't that much access or familiarity with. So spaces, access, it was like a rabbit hole at some point, and I had to after 4 years, I was like, I think I need to move on. Yeah, and so yeah, that's that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now I hope you all are getting to see how amazing she is and why I thought I want to be her friend.
I'll be your friend, Njideka.
No, but just your incredibleness shines through in everything. I knew her from the game project, and then you keep talking about me being gracious and this and ISCP. All I did was say apply and told them,
Mm-hmm.
you will apply. The rest is all you.
Actually, the rest was all me. We
Yeah.
have we have Juliana in the audience, and she was an administrator at the time. And I remember when they let me, well, they said, you're in, and I gave them such a hard time. I was like, well, I'm only free in June, and they were like, well, it was a back and forth. So yes, I did my part too.
But ISCP,
Thanks, ISCP.
is the International Studio and Curatorial Program, which is phenomenal. You get to have these beautiful conversations with people from different parts of the world, which is like a great way to have different eyes look at your work and see what they're taking from it, and they have lectures. So Juliana reached out to me and said, we want more people, we want people from Nigeria and other countries to come do this. I think maybe you said you hadn't really had a lot of Nigerians, and you said, is there anyone you can think of? I was like, well, I met this girl. And then the rest is all you. Yeah, but so that was what I knew you coming in from, and then this project came on, you're like, whoa, but a part of me is like, yeah, I'm not shocked. And then every text from you is like, I won the Emmy. It's like, yeah, I can see, not surprised.
And that's also where I met Eric Shiner. He had come in to do a studio visit, and it was like the best studio visit. And then he came and saw the screening in London and followed up. And we were in London together. We had this beautiful afternoon. Was it high tea, low tea? One of the teas. So we had all the crumpets and all the UK stuff. So he's just been a wonderful supporter.
I have a question about Ibadan. So Ibadan is a city in Nigeria, the third largest city. I've never been. I've heard so much about it my whole life because it's a cultural center. It has the university there. But also I was reading about it, and this article I was reading talked about how one of the big arts, schools, movements in Nigeria is based in Ibadan, because I know of the Nsukka school, and I've heard of the Mbari school, but I had not looked too much into it. So is it Mbari school, Mbari society? But it was based in Ibadan, and it had Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, Bruce Onobropeya. So it was performance, musicians, artists, writers, all in this space. They had international people come do lectures. Malcolm X. I feel like there was someone, Jacob Lawrence came and did a project. So I was wondering, how did you end up in Ibadan? Was it because of this artistic lineage that stretches from the 60s or family?
No. So remember, my lineage in art is 12 years old. It's only 12 years old. But I will say, from the University of Ibadan, how we ended up in Ibadan, because both my parents are actually not from Ibadan, is that we had family friends, very dear family friends, who were, are now retired lecturers at the University of Ibadan. So one in medicine and one in petroleum engineering. And I don't know, they were kind of, we're a bit nomadic, my family are, let's call ourselves hippies. But they were kind of our tie to Nigeria. So each time we would come home for let's say, holidays or Easters or Christmases, we would be with them, their family. So you know how you sort of latched onto a family, and that's where my Ibadan connection comes from. So maybe not the artistic lineage as such, but the academic one from University of Ibadan. But so much was happening there at the time, and yeah, I think there's going to be a revival in Ibadan of just artistic activity, and there's already.
But also, it's a city with so much history. Sometimes when I'm looking for pictures for my work, if I'm looking for old pictures, colonial pictures, I end up looking through pictures of Ibadan because there are so many structures there. There are some of the first buildings in Nigeria.
And I don't want to miss this out, because I think it's important to know. But if someone knows, can you shout out the name? I don't want to. That's doing the cathedral and the spaces. His name just escaped me in Ibadan. Yeah, please. No hand. Oh,
but
gosh.
I know what I know.
Yeah, and I was just talking about it the other day, but I'm having a brain freeze. But I'll probably think about it as we end. Yeah.
Is there any other picture you want to talk? Oh, yeah, we can. I'll just zoom. How much time do we have? Oh, okay. Oh, that's good.
Q&A?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I know sometimes you feel maybe the thing to be said about this is a lot, so maybe I will, let's see what's next.
Okay, and then if not, we can come back to it.
We can come back to it.
If you don't like the other one.
I do like this one. Every once in a while you make a work and you let it go, and it doesn't hit you till years later that this is a work I should have kept. Oh. Yeah, it's like you're making stuff for a show, your mind is scattered, and now I have time to reflect and look back 3 years later. But this is part of a series I've been working on since 2012 called The Beautiful Ones, and talking again about how we have different classics in Nigeria. When you're in secondary school in Nigeria, one of the books most people read is titled The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born by Ayukwe Ama, and it's set in the 60s in Ghana, kind of deals with a lot of what we've been talking of. Because what happened with our parents, I think our parents had very interesting lives. Yeah, your parents would be similar generation, but born before 60?
Before 60s?
1960?
Yeah, 160 and then 150.
Okay, but Nigeria used to be under British rule till 1960. So my parents went from being, what was called British protected citizens to being Nigerian citizens. So it's like such a big shift in their life. How did I get on this track? I've lost my train of thought. I'll make my way back to it. But even like my parents were both born in the village, but they ended up going to the city for college. And I think both my parents, my dad went to Germany for a while for some schooling. I don't know what it was, but my mom did her postdoc in London. So maybe that's where that interest in maybe they had this life where they had seen all these big moves that they understood how vast the world was. I'm trying to trace back my thought. Oh yeah, the Ayukwe Ama. So the book is set in this time of, there was a time in the 60s where a lot of African countries became independent, and it was a very hopeful period. Nobody even says it anymore, the giant of Africa. But everybody thought Nigeria was going to be this, and still kind of is, but was going to be this central hub, education for all, electricity for all, education for all. I mean, there were jingles on the TV about it. And then not just Nigeria, Ghana, and a lot of other countries, but then it just ended up being military coup after military coup, like a domino across various African countries. And so the book, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, is really set in this period of so much hope that then really crashed. And so I've been thinking a lot of my generation and how it, thinking of my generation against my parents' generation, and feeling that there's a little bit more hope in our generation. I mean, now it's getting dicey again, but more hopeful than their generation. There seems to be a cultural renaissance happening in different avenues. So I was thinking of this series, The Beautiful Ones, as my response to the book. Thinking of a hopeful series where my generation, if my parents were the beautiful ones that never came, maybe in my generation, maybe we might have, I don't know, hoping that we have. So it's a series of, I rarely do straight portraits, but straight portraits, it started off with my oldest sister as a kid, then my brother as a kid. So it started off being a lot of family members, and now it's branched out to friends. I reached out to my high school and explained the project to them and told people they could share pictures with me. So this is a composite that is based off a little bit of a picture from one of my friends from high school. And so this is in the Beautiful One series. I don't know if it was as hopeful as the rest. So this and the yellow piece with the dress was part of the last show I did at David Zwerner. And just based off of some things from my personal life, I was kind of a little bit, let's call it sad. And I think just, sometimes when you're sad, it just makes you think of other sad things. Sorry, I'm being very vague, but you kind of like dwell in your sadness in your mind. But anyway, somehow I started thinking a lot of growing up in Nigeria, and we saw some messed up stuff that was normal. Not normal, but not a big deal. And you know how sometimes you're just like, damn, I've not even thought of that till now. And like looking back now, like that was not okay. But like when we were in QC, every once in a while we have, oh God, I can't remember what all these things, it wasn't eggs yet, but it's when you have to you go on a day trip somewhere.
Like an excursion?
Yeah, like an excursion day. So we had an excursion day for my house, Efunjoke House, and we decided to go to Unilag because Unilag, University of Lagos, had a lagoon. And we walk over there and we have snacks. And like after being in boarding school for months, it's such a beautiful treat to be outside and run around and just not be, because the boarding school is walled off and you cannot leave while you're there unless you have permission. And as someone whose family didn't live in Lagos, I never had permission to leave. So we had gone on the excursion to Unilag, and when we got to the lagoon, there was a dead body in the water. But we settled in and had a picnic. Which was kind of like, damn. It didn't even impress on me. But then looking back, it's just like, I think what tripped it off is somebody on social media had posted something about oh, Lagos is so intense. Like, what are some of the things you've witnessed? And the stories were, whoo! And then you're just like, wow, people have seen some banana stuff. And then you're just like, oh, wait, I have seen banana stuff. Like, it didn't even register. And then I was texting my siblings because we have a family WhatsApp. And then all these stories start coming out. But, I was thinking, it just felt like there were all these stories happening or coming back to me at the same time, thinking of Ken Saro-Wiwa, thinking of the day at Unilag, but even things growing up under dictatorship, there's a lot of public executions. That's how they pacify people and control people. But they will show the pictures in newspapers, and sometimes they used to show them on TV, but that was maybe a little bit before my time. But Bar Beach was a public execution venue, and people will gather and they will shoot people in public and put the pictures. I know this is getting really morbid, but this is what happens when you grow up under military dictatorship. So I've just, my mind was just in that space. Also because I was thinking a lot about Nigerian, sorry, this is getting long. I was thinking a lot of Nigerian textbooks. And if you can go back to the yellow dress, I was thinking a lot of childhood images, the things I remember looking at and loving. I remember being in class and looking at that print in my book, the things that made me want to draw and made me want to paint. And so I've kind of gone down this rabbit hole of trying to track down some of these books, and they're really hard. These, I ended up finding in a library in Slovenia, and I was able to get somebody to help me contact them, and they did the photocopies and sent me the digital files. But every once in a while, they pop up online. I bought a copy from somebody in Turkey. Every once in a while, these books pop up online, and I buy it. But there's this person who did a lot of children's books. So sorry, if you go back to the one with the baby. So there are all these kind of things tied in together that I don't know if they'll all come across, but the title of this is Still You Bloom in This Land of No Gardens. The Land of No Gardens is a poem by Maman Vatsa, who was he was, I don't know what his rank was. He was a soldier that was executed. Oh God, I hope I don't get in trouble.
You're fine.
Well,
You're fine.
he was executed. I'm not saying anything wrong. He was executed by the then president. They said he was planning a coup. Who knows? So I've been trying to get a lot of his works because I remember reading him a lot as a kid. And then I finally found a book and I texted it to my siblings with the pictures. Like, oh my God, do y'all remember this book? And my sister wrote back like, oh God, I cried I cried all morning the day I woke up and they told me Vatsa had been killed. But it's like, that's like stuff we grew up with. You get down for breakfast and your parents are reading the newspaper and they tell you your favorite writer has been murdered by the state. So if you go back to the yellow piece of the girl in the pink pants, so this is kind of like my attempt to dip my legs into that water. I was thinking of all the things we see and how they stay with you and how you think they are not there, but they're still lurking. And so I had this idea of an after image, which is when you watch an image and you turn it off, but it still stays in your mind, and sometimes if you stare at it long enough, it actually burns your retina, so it becomes this thing that becomes permanent in your memory. So anyway, so this is a piece.
What is it called?
This is called The Beautiful Ones, because all the series are called The Beautiful Ones, but it has a subheading. Okay, it's called The Beautiful Ones, A Sunny Day at Bar Beach. Because I was thinking a play of it like who's the point guy? This is so bad. Sarah, like when they're all at the park, but thinking of how everybody just went to Bar Beach and hung out as they were killing people. And it was just like a thing you did. Like, oh, it's a sunny day. Let's go down to Bar Beach. And my family did not take part in this, but let me make that very clear. But when you find, and there are videos and pictures online, there are a lot of people around watching it. But usually, of course, they've made you think these people are terrible, so then you don't care about what's happening to them as you watch. So in this piece, it's hard to tell, and it's intentional. There's actually a depiction of a scene from Bar Beach, but it's one of those things that I wanted it to almost feel like it's a whisper. It's barely there, but if you know it, you know what you're looking at, and otherwise you don't even know there's anything on the TV. Sorry, I've talked a lot. Done now.
That's okay. That's okay.
Can you please wrap up?
Okay.
Bring us to a nice, happy place.
A nice, yeah.
It's 2 words.
Okay. Oh, no, it's okay. I'll yeah, Njideka, you said a lot, and you had asked the question. I didn't want to interrupt you, but you were like, is there hope? What's, in terms of from generation to generation? I would say there is. I think I have maybe the advantage of being a little bit of an outsider. I mean, I live in Nigeria, but I think I look at things as a bit of an outsider. And you're part of that hope, the creative industries that are coming up in Nigeria, whether it's fashion or art or music, and the ways that people are talking about Nigeria now is quite different, right? Sometimes I look in comment sections and, people will say, oh, Nigerians are just funny. Oh, they are really deep. Or they will say the craziest things, and they work really hard. And, it wasn't always like that, right? Not too long ago, we were all Prince scammers or, but it is changing. I think it is changing, it is evolving, and I think that creatives have played such a huge part in that. And, I did an artist talk last week, and someone was saying that, she asked me a question like, do you think your work gives women hope? And I was like, well, I'm not gonna be as presumptuous to say, yes, it does. Like, even though I did set out with that intention when I first started out, and I would say it a lot back then, but now, as I've grown up, I would never say that myself. And so she ended up picking back the answer or the question herself and said, well, it's given me hope. And I will say that for you. I mean, and you don't even know how much hope it's given people to for me, I mean, I grew up opening textbooks of artists like Picasso and Degas when I was in England. There was no one there that looked like you or Wangechi Mutu. And so, and you came at such a critical moment in time into the world, into the art space, and we were all watching with so much like pride and hope. And so you might not know it, but there's so much hope, and you've done so much. Just to give some context to everything as well, because your context is absolutely, it's correct, and I mean there's so many other stories that you could add to that, but it is balanced with your existence and your work. So thank you. Thank you.
We're going to talk about Modupeola's
yeah, so
the two new works.
Well, no, I'll just very briefly.
We'll
so I have these two works here with the horses at the Conductor Fair. So they'll be upstairs on the third floor, referencing the Ojude Oba Festival in Ogun State, which is going to take place next month in June. And it is an annual festival that takes place after one of the Muslim holidays, and it honors the local and traditional rulers. Awojale, Awojale, thank you. The Awojale of Ijebu land. And it's like such a spectacle. You have a work actually called Ashoebi, right? Yeah, and so Ashoebi refers to when, if you've ever seen or been to a Nigerian wedding, you have the groom's side wears maybe like all green, and then the bride's side wears maybe all violet, but they're different permutations or iterations of each of these color schemes. But the Ashoebi means, we're wearing, Asho means cloth, and Ebi is sort of like clan, tribe, group, to reference that, you know, team bride, team groom, and in a similar way, at this festival, this Ojude Oba festival, you have the market women wearing their own Ashoebi. You have people from different families wearing theirs. They mount these horses. It is chaotic. This is like a sliver of the work, intentionally not landscape, which, you know, there's so much more information there, but I was referencing the Islamic miniature style of creating work, which is like very sort of landscape format. Lots of textures, there's a lot of burning in the work to give credence to, you know, some of the stories that Njideka was mentioning. The burning in my work actually represents, or it draws from a time when I lived in Rwanda as a child. My parents were working as diplomats there, and we got there right after the genocide in 1994, so we got there a few months after, and so my parents were trying to settle us into schools. All the school buildings had big holes and craters and bullets in it that we were looking at, and so that's where the burning comes from. So it's this idea that, I mean, even in Nigeria, we have our own conversations that we haven't had. You know, in Rwanda, as terrible as that situation was in my short lifetime, there's healing happening. I'm not ignorant to the fact that it's very imperfect, but there is a healing happening. They were able to call it a genocide. It's important what you call a thing before you proceed. And I'm aware that, you know, these conversations, I understand that you didn't want to go there, but sometimes we need to go there. You need to call a thing before you can rectify it. And so they did do that in Rwanda. In Nigeria, we still have not done that for our civil wars. And so just this idea that there's always signs of burning, signs of trouble, even with all the beauty and the pomp and pageantry of something as fun as the Ojude Oba Festival. Notwithstanding, I will be having a really beautiful outfit. Just to, you know, I'm not sure what I'm wearing yet, but I'm gonna go with a group of art people. You are all invited. You are invited. So our Ashoebi is going to be the art group. There's going to be an art group for the first time. The people of Ijebu have been, in a similar way to which I approached the Dreams from the Deep End project, the people of this town have been so generous in giving me books, resources, information. They've hosted dinners for me where the oldest member of the community would come and just tell me everything. So he's telling me the story of Nigeria, and from even like an economic perspective through this festival, so many different perspectives. I'm not sure how deep into the rabbit hole I want to go into, because Dreams from the Deep End, I didn't come out of it for like 4 years, but there's just a wealth of information around me that I can draw from and celebrate and take hope from. Yeah. So yeah. So thank you for listening to our TED Talk.
Thank you all.
Thank you both. Should we do Q&A?
Yes.
I'll play the questions. Might anyone have? I'll start by asking, both of you really do very complex surfaces through a variety of tricks and means. You've already talked about burning, you've talked about photo transfer a little bit, but obviously they create these incredible rich palimpsests of layers and of meaning, and there are always hidden surprises. How do you think about revealing those little hints of surprise that peek through as you're making?
So when I'm making the work, now we're getting into the craft of things. I think for me, it comes from, worry is not the right word, but there is a big part of the work that is not accessible to everyone. You know, it's a lot about the experiences of Nigeria from the mid-'80s into the 90s and a little bit to today. So because people might not be able to access that, it really makes me work hard on the painting of it, like the surface of it, where like when you come in front of it, and that's why I really don't like the work being shared online, but you know, it's the world we live in, but they're made for you to stand in front of it. And I want your eyes, because you know, it's like, it's one of those things we all experience, but you might not be attuned to it. Like when you look at velvet, there's a way it kind of feels in your eye. If you look at something flat, I don't know what it is. It's almost like your eye is working like a camera. It's like, it's that feeling you see when you see something and you go, ooh, I want to touch it. It's doing something in your eye. So I want to play up with that when I make the work. So really thinking of how to push and pull my surface. Also in the composition, I might have areas that really recede into space and areas that come up front. So when you're in front of it, this is constantly happening. So you're actually engaged with what the specificity of painting. And this is one where I know we didn't really we didn't talk specifically about mentorship, but part of mentorship is learning from your elders, either by going to museums, seeing their work, or talking to them directly. But I had seen somewhere that Kerry James Marshall put salt in his paints. You know, when you're just like, I don't even know how true this is, but I heard it. And I think when I heard that, because my training is in oil paints and he works in acrylic, but I was always, like when I looked at his works, his surfaces excited me. And I had been trained that acrylic couldn't really do that. So seeing his surface and hearing that was really a aha moment for me, because it made me realize that because to work with transfers, the work has to be in acrylic. So I think what that Kerry James nugget of knowledge I heard did for me is to make me realize that it is possible to work with acrylic and have these luminous surfaces that you can push and pull, but it's a matter of what do you do to the acrylic paint to get it to do something different. Because acrylic on its own is not luminous, it's plastic in liquid form, it's very flat. But how do I create a surface that kind of keeps you out, and how do I create a surface that makes you feel you can move through the layers into the work? And so that was actually, that's a fun part of what I do in my studio. So right now, as I'm here, it's like, I have incredible assistants. So I'm working on this project where the dress is a velvety dress, and they are kind of intense white, not even white, like intense light blue patterns on it. And so it's one of those, like, I know what I wanted to do visually when you're looking at it, but I don't know how that can be achieved. So, and this is where, like, being, I came from the sciences too. My major in undergrad was biology, but that's where, like, the like scientist in you is like, okay, we're gonna do this like an experiment. So when I left, I actually wrote almost like a recipe for them to do. So it's like, I want you to make 3 sheets of transfers about this big, and then I mixed the wash color I want. And so there's like A, B, C that I want them to try out. So A is to push the wash all over the transfers and then to paint the design on it with opaque pale blue paint. But that's one where the pale blue might not jump. And now we're getting into the weeds of like painting. The pale blue might not jump because of the dark wash under it. Because what happens is when you're looking at a painting, the light goes through the air, boom, hits the painting, bounces back at you. If the light hits white, it bounces as you quickly. That's why those Rembrandts with the white thing, they just glow. I had a teacher who used to still do this, and I learned it from a teacher, which is at the end of the day, he turns off the light in his studio to look at the work. And what he actually lets you see is the areas that glow, the areas where the light is hitting clean paint and coming back at you. And it helps you see how your painting breaks into big shapes. But and that's why if you paint, the painters that are here, if you paint a dark and then you paint a light on it, it never has that impact anymore because the black underneath is absorbing some of that light. So the first part is for them to do the painting on top. The second part, because I want to have this quick flashback from the dark wash, is I actually went out and bought this thing called Flashy. I've not used it before, but it's vinyl, it's opaque, it's meant to totally obscure that dark. So I want them to do one where they paint with the Flashy on top of the dark wash.
Are you sure you're not giving out all the trade secrets?
And then put the blue paint on top. And then the last one, which will be the most labor intensive, is actually to cut little strips of tape and tape off all the patterns so that it stays white before we do the wash. But yeah, so that's just like one example of how, because I want the work, I feel like the greatest compliments I can get as an artist, given how much time I put into surface. And my sister has a work of mine, and every once in a while, she will be like, Njideka, I've had this work for a long time, and I never get tired of looking at it. And for me, that's just like, yes. Because that's what I want. It's like I want this work where these things are happening to your eye, and you don't quite know why, and every once in a while, something reveals itself. So it's like when you see this dress, it's like, if I get it right, I know what I want it to do. I want it to be this flickering glow. And you just be like, oh, I don't know why that's shimmering. It's like, it's shimmering because we've done like a week of trials to figure out how paint can have this optical effect on the viewer. I don't know if that answered your question.
I was gonna say, Eric, well, like this is maybe as the last question, because I feel like this is a whole other discussion in terms of like material concerns. I don't even remember the question, but I will sort of piggyback off of some of the things. Actually, sorry, Eric, can you repeat the question again? It was just about materials. Yeah, how you hide. And Njideka was extremely generous. You gave all the trade secrets. I was like, oh, you want to keep going? But maybe I can use this as a reference because the work that's shown upstairs, people had so many questions about, like, what have you done? Is this a batik? Is this a print?
Batik came to my
Yeah, everyone was saying, is this a print? And I was like, no, it's actually acrylic paint, largely on the burned canvas. So I always start with, since you've been generous, let me do it too, because yesterday some people were asking, and I'm like, well, why you want to know? But no, but I give sort of like halfway, but there's a lot of sort of masking fluid on this. I feel exposed. But a lot of acrylic as well. And it feels, there's a lot of planning that goes into this, actually. For this particular series, I am embarrassed to admit that there's like a 100-page PowerPoint with different references, or maybe proud to admit, let me say that, proud to admit. Because I also like what Njideka was saying when she was talking about the assistants and how she's given them things to do. I am of the belief that you can share that you have help, right? Like if you look at an artist practice and you see the amount of work that goes into it, even the tape, right? Once you give the instruction, there's a lot of labor that goes into actually getting it right, accurate, and you become a little bit impatient once you've decided on it. And sometimes it takes months to decide on it. And so the process of having help, I love it when artists are able to open up and say, yes, there are 3 people currently figuring something out while I am on stage having a conversation. And so in this work, there's masking fluid, there's a lot of pencil detail as well. So graphite, I like to just get in there. It feels like I'm journaling. And acrylic, palette knife, gold, that's like my primary color from before. So it shows up now, not as a dominant color, but in lines, in fine line details. Stenciling on the work, and then the burning. So the burning, like I said, I start off with the burning, but then I come back and then I burn certain things around the masking fluid. So that's also like, how did you get that precise burn? The masking fluid is acting as a bit of a resist in that case. And then, it's always fun to rub it off all at the end to see what's revealed. Sometimes if there's like a wet acrylic, it will seep under the masking fluid. Under the masking fluid into the surface, which is nice because you get nice surprises. And then I go back and add collage elements, burnt collage elements. I always say in the studio, I'm like, the work isn't snatched. It's not snatched. It's not snatched until I've shaded it and then put burn elements, and it gives this like nice, really organic contrast. And I'm like, okay, it's snatched. The work is snatched. And so with materials, you were talking about acrylic. This could be a whole separate conversation as a chemical engineer as well. And but you know who I love? I love golden paints.
I use a lot of golden, but have you heard of Nova color?
Girl, sis, like
their pigments. Oh my God.
Yeah, and they come in and do these educational things where they're like, if you add this open to it, you can push the acrylic like oil. It looks like oil, so you can work with acrylic for hours once you add this thing. So golden, they're like chemist people, so they come in and they explain to you. If you want to know, you can create like watercolor surface grounds on the canvas. Next level. So they can come in and like do a whole demonstration with all of the different things that they have. And if you walked into like an actual golden store, half of the things you wouldn't know what to do with them until you've taken that class. I have them on speed dial, so yeah.
I should take that class.
I have them on speed dial, so just in terms of materials, materiality.
I was like, it's so exciting to hear you talk about masking fluid, because that was on my list of things to try.
Yeah.
I was thinking instead of having to tape this really intricate thing, I should mask fluid
These are the trade
it
secrets,
out.
girl. We talking too much.
But the only reason why I didn't do it is I remember, I don't know if you know Doron. But a good friend of mine, Doron Langberg, phenomenal painter, he was using masking fluid when we were at PAFA together, and I tried it once. It has like a pinky, it kept gunking up my brush.
Okay, well, you don't use a brush that you tend to use again for it. Yeah, you have to use something else. If you don't need precision, you use your fingers, so sometimes I do that. It will gunk up the brush, but you need something to push it, and then take the gunk off, because it dries almost immediately. And then just keep pushing it, and it can cover a large surface area.
Okay, I'm gonna go buy it once I get back to LA. That'll be the next version we'll try.
So masking fluid, I have stacks of it. You need a lot of it. That's the trick.
Okay.
You need a lot of it.
No, but for me, I think that's the fun thing when painters see. I like watching other painters look at my work, but it's like you can tell when they're thinking, "How did you do that?"
Well, now we just told them everything, so thanks.
We keep coming up with newer and newer
I know, yeah,
things.
and then we'll progress to new things. You're right.
But really, the studio is like a little lab where you keep trying different things. And it's kind of fun when you stump people a little bit. But and I love it when that happens to me. Like when you see this and you're like, I don't really understand what's happening in terms of like, how is this done?
Yeah.
Because it's like, is this batik? Is it poured? But you can do marbling and pour it. And
there's a lot there. And then, full disclosure, I had a lot of help on this. So while we're talking about assistance and help and like just capacity building, even in Nigeria, working with communities, and this is beaded, like hand beaded stitching, still incorporating that gold and bronze palette that we saw earlier in the swimming works. But I don't know if anyone has any other questions?
Oh, thank you so much for asking that. It varies from work to work, and I try not to have, like, there is no blanket formula. So I like when I get that question, because it means like, okay, I'm not defaulting to some trend or like formula without being aware of it. So for which one can I pick? Maybe we can go to the dress one. It's usually, actually, let's go to the one with all the plants and the kid. It's informed by the piece. So for instance, like this dress I'm talking about that I'm working on, I know that, so when I do, I can do a whole other presentation with like steps to the work and how it comes together. But at some point, I have the composition done, kind of seamed from different pictures and drawings from different places. And after I have it done, the next thing I do is, and if there's a studio, if you ever see a shot from my studio, this is like a good aside to know, just look around like the side and the walls, you usually see those, but I do these black and white studies, and they're done with Sharpies. And I would do like 20, 30 of them for each work. And so what does help me do, again, and this is just like, talking of mentorship, I worked with Sidney Goodman at the Pennsylvania Academy, and he was pretty into like every good figurative work can be broken into 3 or 4 abstract shapes. And so the black and white drawings help me break it into shapes that are not tied to the figure. So then I'm not thinking of it as, oh, this is a person on a chair. I'm actually thinking of it like, oh, this dark shape locks into this shape this way, and this mid shape locks in this way. And so what I do with those drawings is I make them in Sharpie, so Sharpie bleeds through. And then at the end, I turn them all over so I don't see the line drawings anymore, and I can just see the dark Sharpie shapes. And I pick the one I like the best based off of that. And then I turn it back around. And so that actually begins, so that's the first thing I do is figure out, not always, but this is general, figure out the value study. And then I do something similar again, thinking of breaking it into different shapes from the ones I already did. And this time I might use like red Sharpie. And I do a bunch of them and I turn them around, and that's usually where the transfers will go. So then when I turn them over, some of it then just becomes logistics. If something falls within the red Sharpie and falls within the dark Sharpie, then I know it's a transferred area, but I want it in the dark value. And then that's where you have like the dark wash, like the plant in front. That's where you have the dark wash over the plant. So then you get into just the logistics of it. This one, for instance, I knew that I wanted transfers to go across multiple things. So I wanted transfers that kind of went across different places but split again. So you could be looking at one picture, like when you come up close, you see the picture, but at some moments, the picture separates into different form. So I knew that I wanted her outfit, the floor, and the plants to all be within. So when I did the transfer shape, the transfer shape ended up breaking into the plant on top, her outfit, the plant in front, the floor, and the reflection on the sliding door over there. So that's how I determined the transfer shape. I felt like the piece was busier enough already, so if I did full image transfers, if I did transfers here, this is actually a transfer, but it's a transfer of a screen wall that I seamed together like a picture at a time. But instead of doing little actual photos, it would be too busy. I wanted it to still be in the transfer realm, but kind of toned down. So that is in the transfer realm. That's a transfer. And this whole area, most of this whole area was in the transfer shape. And then the question became, okay, how do I take this transfer shape and split it into different things? How is this one transfer shape? So, and that's why the name is kind of a play on it. These things are blending but stand out too. So how do you have these transfers that 1 minute is the pants and you move an inch, and then it's the floor and you move an inch up and it's the plant. And so then that's where the wash. So once I did the transfers and I knew that I had to separate the plant from the floor from the outfit, then that's where I knew, like, oh, I have to do this with washes. And this was one too, if you come to my studio, like, you'll see little pieces of transfer blocks about this big where we tried out different things to see how it will work. Because some of them are so close, like the outfit and the floor are really close, and how do you get them really close but still different? And it's like getting that calibration exactly right requires some trying out.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why she is called a genius. Yeah. I'm not following that.
Yeah, I love that. Snatched.
You're going to make me follow that.
Oh, okay. The show, oh yeah, before I close it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, exactly, okay. Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you all.